can you believe it? Right there in the living room of my own home, the sanctuary I had built with my own hands, my mother-in-law stood arm in arm with my husband's pregnant mistress. She slapped a check onto the mahogany coffee table with a sharp smack that echoed in the silence. Then she handed me the cruelest ultimatum I had ever heard. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "Take this $175,000 and get out of this house right now. My son needs a real woman, one who can give him an heir, not a barren branch like you." In that moment, I did not cry. I didn't scream. I just froze. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My gaze slowly slid over to the man I had called my husband for 5 full years. Daniel Parker stood there, his head bowed, silent as a marble statue. He wouldn't even look at me. His cowardice, his absolute silence, hurt 1,000 times more than his mother's hateful words. They stood there judging me, discarding me like trash, completely unaware that beneath my loose-fitting sweater, a tiny life was already forming. An unbelievable secret was growing inside me, and their cruelty today would be the catalyst for their downfall tomorrow. My name is Juliana Richardson. Just hours before my life imploded, I was living in a bubble of pure bliss. That evening, I had cooked a feast. The house smelled of rosemary roasted chicken and vanilla, his favorites. I had lit scented candles in every corner, casting a warm, romantic glow over the living room. My heart was overflowing with excitement. I wanted to break the happy news to my husband, Daniel. The pregnancy test earlier that morning had shown 2 bold, pink lines. The ultrasound results from the medical center confirmed it. After years of trying, years of silent prayers and negative tests, I was finally pregnant. I honestly thought this baby would be the thread of love that could mend the tiny tears appearing in our marriage. I thought this child would finally silence my mother-in-law's poisonous comments for good. I was naive enough to believe in that picture-perfect future. But when the grandfather clock in the hall struck exactly 7, the front door didn't just open, it flew open. My husband walked in, but the warm greeting died in my throat because he wasn't alone. Beside him stood his mother, Elena Parker, wearing a scowl that could curdle milk. And trailing behind them was a beautiful, unknown young woman in an expensive designer dress that clung to her curves. The thing that hit me the hardest, harder than the intrusion itself, was the way she grasped Daniel's arm. It wasn't friendly. It was familiar. It was possessive. "Who is that?" I stammered, my voice trembling. My heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. Daniel didn't dare look me in the eye. He shifted awkwardly, trying to pull his arm free from the young woman's grip, but his mother had already stepped forward, blocking my view of him. Elena positioned herself in front of her son and looked at me with triumphant contempt, a look she had been saving for years. "Let me introduce you to someone," she sneered, her voice dripping with venom. "This is Sophia Stewart. She is the daughter of Robert Stewart, the chairman and CEO of Northstar Pharmaceuticals. You know, the largest partner of the hospital where Daniel works. And more importantly, she is carrying my son's blood. The grandchild and heir you could never give me." Every one of her words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. I was paralyzed. The floor seemed to spin beneath my bare feet. My husband had cheated. He was having a child with another woman. And not just any woman, but the daughter of a powerful corporation head. Suddenly, all the scattered pieces clicked together in my mind. The times he came home late claiming emergency staff meetings. The secretive phone calls he took in the bathroom with the water running. Even that expensive designer silk tie he claimed was a gift from a grateful patient. Now I understood. It was the same luxury brand as the handbag this woman, Sophia, was clutching against her hip. "Why did you call me here?" I asked, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice, though everything inside me was shattering into a million jagged pieces. "Smart," Elena scoffed, crossing her arms. "We called you here to give you a choice. A humane choice." She pulled a stack of legal papers and the check from her purse and tossed them onto the table in front of me. Here are the divorce papers Daniel has already signed. She paused for dramatic effect, letting the reality sink in. And here is the check for $175,000. Take the money, sign the papers, and disappear from this house immediately. Consider it charity from our family for the 5 years of your wasted youth. $175,000. Charity. The word hung in the air, heavy and humiliating. I looked at my husband, desperately searching for an explanation, some protection, a flicker of the man I loved. But there was nothing. He stood there silently, head still bowed, hands clenched into fists at his sides. His silence was the answer. He was complicit. He had agreed to everything. He had chosen fame, money, and career advancement over me. 5 years of our relationship, thrown away like yesterday's newspaper. Sophia moved closer, sitting on the sofa and crossing her legs with arrogant grace. She ran a manicured hand over her belly and looked at me with the eyes of a winner surveying her prize. "Juliana, you should be reasonable," she said, her voice smooth and condescending. "Daniel loves me. I can give him a career you could never provide in your entire life. Take the money and go. Don't make this complicated. Don't make this complicated." How ridiculous. They were the ones who had caused this tragedy, destroying a home and a marriage, yet I was the one being told to behave. My hand, resting on my thigh, involuntarily clenched into a fist. Then, I slowly lifted it and gently placed it on my stomach. There, too, a small life was growing day by day. My child. His child. But I knew I couldn't speak the truth. To speak now would be to humiliate myself. To use the baby as leverage to cling to a man who no longer wanted me would be pathetic. My child didn't deserve to be a bargaining chip. They deserved a better life alongside a strong mother, not one begging for love from a traitor. A terrible coldness suddenly wrapped around my soul, freezing the tears before they could fall. The pain morphed into contempt, and that contempt gave me a strange, vibrating strength. I slowly stood up. I stopped looking at them as family and started seeing them as enemies. I picked up the check for $175,000 from the table. Elena and Sophia watched me with satisfied smiles, thinking they had won, thinking every woman had a price. But then, to their astonishment, I tore the check down the middle. Then again. And again. I ripped it into tiny, worthless pieces and let them flutter down onto the coffee table like confetti. "Your money is no good to me," I said, my voice steady and cold as steel. "My love isn't purchasable with this filthy money." I picked up the pen and signed the divorce papers with a flourish. "I am leaving, but not because you are kicking me out. It is because I find life under the same roof with people like you utterly repulsive." With that, I turned on my heel and walked straight into the bedroom. I didn't look back even once, though I heard Elena scream behind me. "You ungrateful girl. If you don't take that money, don't you dare regret it later." I regret nothing, I thought to myself. I only regretted wasting 5 years of my youth on an undeserving man. Silently, efficiently, I packed a few clothes and my personal items into a small carry-on suitcase. As I rolled the suitcase toward the exit, the wheels humming on the hardwood floor, I walked past the 3 of them. Without a single word of farewell, without a single glance, I left the house and stepped out into the biting cold night. My hand instinctively rested on my belly. They didn't know they had driven out not 1, but 2 people. And they also didn't know that the lamb they had just trampled underfoot would soon return as a wolf to reclaim everything. As the taxi door slammed shut, carrying me and my little secret away from the place that was once a home, a nest, I didn't cry. The tears seemed to have dried up after the immense shock. I just sat there staring silently at the street lights blurring in the night, watching the city pass by. My soul felt empty, hollowed out. 5 years. The best 5 years of my youth, I had given to him. I had given everything to a love I believed was a fairy tale. And now all that remained was a cold divorce paper and the bitter truth that the fairy tale had been a lie from the start. Memories of the past 5 years flooded my mind, clear and painful like a slow-motion film. I had met Daniel on a late fall evening 5 years ago. At the time, I was a young financial analyst, fresh out of college, working at a small brokerage firm. He was a young resident physician in his final year of training at the teaching hospital where I went for a routine checkup. I was impressed from that very first meeting. It wasn't just his handsome looks, though he was charming, but it was the dedication and warmth that radiated from his eyes. Amidst the chaos of a busy hospital, he was the only one who patiently listened to me and thoroughly explained my health condition. His hands were gentle and professional. He had such a kind smile, a smile that seemed capable of dispelling all a patient's worries and fears. After that first appointment, we ran into each other a few more times in the hospital cafeteria. Then, the conversation started. He told me about the tough night shifts, the brutal pressure of the medical profession, and the student loans weighing him down. But in his voice, there was always a burning passion, a thirst to save lives. I told him about the dry world of numbers and stock markets. He listened with admiration, his eyes full of respect. "You are such a brilliant woman, Juliana," he had said. "Being able to understand such complex markets is admirable." Our love came naturally, unfolding like a slow bloom. It was built on rushed dinner dates after his shifts, on the home-cooked meals I brought him at the hospital in Tupperware containers, and on daily texts of support and care. He wasn't rich. As a young resident, his salary barely covered the necessities, and he sent money back home to his mother in Mississippi every month. But he never let me feel deprived. He might wear an old, faded scrub top, but he would save his entire monthly discretionary fund to buy me a new dress for my birthday. He might eat instant ramen all week, but on the weekend, he would definitely take me out to a nice restaurant, insisting on paying the bill. He used to hold my hand across the table and say, "Juliana, I am sorry I can't give you the life you deserve right now. But trust me, as soon as we get through this hard time, I am definitely going to make you happy. I am going to give you the world." I believed those words. I drank them up like water. I didn't need material possessions. I just needed his sincerity. But I didn't just sit back and support him emotionally. I used my skill, a skill I had never revealed to anyone, not even him, to secretly advance his career. Dear listeners, I had a secret. Outwardly, I was just an ordinary office worker with a meager salary. But in reality, I was an anonymous investor in the stock market, a ghost in the machine. It was an innate talent I discovered back in college. I had a unique intuition for numbers, a gut feeling that was rarely wrong. I could analyze and predict market fluctuations in an astonishing way. With the small inheritance my parents left me after their fatal accident, I had secretly invested. Over the years, that money grew. It compounded into a sum many people couldn't earn in 10 lifetimes. I was sitting on a fortune. I didn't use that money for luxury cars or penthouses. I continued to live modestly because I was scared. I was scared that wealth would change me, and terrified it would attract insincere people who only wanted my bank account. I simply wanted to find a man who loved the real me, the ordinary girl named Juliana Richardson. And when I met Daniel, I thought I had found that man. So, I used my talent and my secret fortune to be a stepping stone for him. He had talent as a doctor, certainly, but in the complex, political environment of a major hospital, talent alone is rarely enough. He needed opportunities. He needed connections. I secretly used my investment fund, operating under a shell company and a different name, to donate a substantial amount to his hospital for the purchase of state-of-the-art robotic surgical equipment. In return for the donation, I made only one condition. The hospital had to create opportunities for young, talented doctors like Daniel Parker to participate in major surgeries and be sent overseas for advanced training. The opportunity came just as I planned. He was selected for a team that would perform a complicated heart surgery, an operation previously reserved only for chiefs of staff. He mastered it brilliantly. His name started getting noticed in medical journals. Then he was sent on a short study trip to Boston to learn advanced medical technologies. When he returned, he seemed to have gained wings. He successfully performed one complex surgery after another, saving many patients who had been written off by other doctors. He quickly rose from an ordinary resident to one of the youngest and most talented surgeons at the medical center. He was so happy during those days. He would come home, hug me, and say everything was thanks to luck and my constant emotional support. He didn't know that the goddess of luck was the very girl he was holding in his arms. I didn't tell him the truth. I didn't want him to develop an inferiority complex or feel like he hadn't earned his success. I just wanted to stand quietly in the background, witnessing his success and his happiness. I naively believed my silent sacrifice would be rewarded with eternal love. For 5 years, I nurtured that love, feeding his career with everything I had. I paved a road sprinkled with roses with my own hands, never expecting that I wouldn't be the one walking beside him when he finally stepped onto that path of glory. After Daniel solidified his position at the hospital, we decided to get married. It was the decision I had waited for so long. But right there, right at the beginning of our forever, the first cracks in our love story began to appear. And the person who created those cracks with a chisel and hammer was none other than his mother, Elena. When he first introduced me to her, she greeted me with a seemingly warm smile. But behind that smile, I sensed a scrutinizing, coldly calculating gaze. She was assessing my worth like livestock. She didn't ask about my work, my passions, or my character. She only asked questions like, "What do your parents do for a living? How many siblings do you have to split the inheritance with? What is your current salary?" When she found out I was an orphan and lived modestly, the smile faded slightly from her lips. From then on, she began to interfere in our relationship. She often called Daniel, insinuating that I wasn't a suitable match for a man of his rising stature. She would say, "My son, you are a respected doctor now. Marriage isn't just about marrying who you love, but who helps your career. This girl might be sweet, but with her background, she will only be a burden to you. Look at the city director's daughter. Beautiful and from a good family. If you marry someone like that, wouldn't your career advance even further?" At first, Daniel still stood by me. He argued with his mother, defending our relationship. He would say, "Mom, don't talk like that. I love Juliana for who she is, not for anything else. I don't need anyone's help. I can make it on my own." Those words moved me deeply. I believed our love was strong enough to overcome all prejudices and greed. But then, another figure emerged who changed everything. It was Sophia Stewart. As the only daughter of Robert Stewart, the CEO of Northstar Pharmaceuticals, she was American royalty in the medical world. Northstar was the strategic partner and largest sponsor of the hospital where Daniel worked. Sophia was beautiful, sharp, and incredibly arrogant. She was a woman used to getting whatever she wanted, whenever she wanted it. And this time, she wanted Daniel. She pursued him openly, shamelessly. Even though he was a married man, she used tactics that an ordinary girl like me could never compete with. She gifted him expensive designer watches and tailored suits. She leveraged her father's contacts to create speaking opportunities he couldn't refuse. Under the guise of business meetings, she constantly invited him to elite restaurants and prestigious country clubs. She showed him another world. A world of power, fame, and influence. A world he had never experienced growing up in Mississippi. Most importantly, she struck right at the core of his mother's ambitions. Elena rejoiced like a gold prospector who had struck the motherlode when she learned that Sophia was the daughter of a corporation head. She saw Sophia as the golden ticket, the master key that could open the door to a brilliant future for her son. She openly began trying to push the two of them together, ignoring the ring on her son's finger. She often invited Sophia over for dinner, treating her even more warmly than her own son. In contrast, she became increasingly cruel and unkind toward me. Every time I was around, she would intentionally mention Sophia. She would praise her relentlessly, and then turn to me just to twist the knife. She would say, "Now, that is a woman from a good family. Beautiful, capable, and with connections. If my Daniel marries her, one phone call from her father, and he will have a luxury private clinic instantly, instead of bending over backward working for others." These words were like a slow-acting poison, seeping into Daniel's consciousness day by day. A man from humble beginnings who had fought so hard to reach his current position was suddenly being offered a shortcut to the summit. And slowly, painfully, I watched him take the bait. How does a marriage die? It is rarely a sudden explosion. It is a slow suffocation. It happens in the silence between two people sitting on the same couch. It happens when he stops looking you in the eye. Daniel changed by degrees, seduced by the glittering world Sophia Stewart dangled in front of him. At first, it was just late nights at the hospital or networking dinners he claimed were essential for his career. But then came the sense. He would come home smelling not of the antiseptic hospital soap I knew so well, but of a cloying, expensive perfume. Something musky and floral that lingered on his collar. I saw the text messages that were too short, the phone calls he took in the other room, whispering in a hush I wasn't meant to hear. My heart was breaking in slow motion, day after agonizing day, but I didn't scream. I didn't throw vases or demand the truth. I swallowed my pride and stayed silent, hoping it was just a phase. I told myself that men sometimes lose their way when ambition blinds them, and that if I just loved him enough, he would remember the vows we made 5 years ago. I wanted to be the safe harbor he would eventually return to. But hope is a dangerous thing when the man you love has already checked out. The distance between us grew into a canyon. Daniel, the gentle man I married, the man who used to leave sticky notes on the bathroom mirror telling me I was beautiful, had vanished. In his place was a cold stranger obsessed with status. He was no longer just a doctor, he was a social climber, dragged into the high society whirlpool by Sophia and her powerful father. His excuses became insults to my intelligence. Emergency surgeries that didn't exist. Shareholder meetings at midnight. But I saw the truth on social media. Friends of Sophia would post photos of them at galas or five-star restaurants downtown. In those pictures, Daniel looked at her with a hunger he hadn't shown me in years. It felt like 1,000 needles piercing my chest every time I scrolled past a photo of them laughing over champagne while I sat at home waiting with a cold dinner. I tried to be perfect. I cooked his favorite meals, kept the house spotless, and dressed in the clothes he used to like. I thought if I could just be the perfect wife, he would snap out of it. But my silence didn't wake him up. It only emboldened him. He stopped hiding it. He would come home at 2 in the morning, lipstick stains on his shirt, and when I tried to touch his arm, he would brush me off with a sigh of exhaustion. And then there was his mother. Elena Parker made no secret of her disdain. She watched my marriage crumble with a satisfied smirk, sprinkling salt on my open wounds. Whenever Sophia visited our home under the guise of business, Elena would summon me like a maid. She would make me pour the tea, cut the fruit, and serve them, forcing me to watch them flirt right in my own living room. She wanted to break me. She wanted me to feel small. I remember her telling Sophia, right in front of me, that I was good at domestic tasks and would make a fine helper for the future of the family. She treated me like a placeholder, a servant keeping the seat warm for the woman she actually wanted as a daughter-in-law. I was living in a personal hell. I lost 10 pounds. My eyes were permanently swollen from crying in the shower so Daniel wouldn't hear. I thought about leaving every single day. But 5 years is a long time to just erase. And then, the miracle happened. It was the most confusing, terrifying, beautiful moment of my life. I was feeling nauseous one morning and took a test. 2 pink lines. I sat on the cold bathroom floor, clutching that plastic stick, and wept. But for the first time in months, they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. I was going to be a mother. This baby was the answer. In my naive heart, I believed this innocent life would be the bridge to bring us back together. I thought that once Daniel knew he was going to be a father, the old Daniel would return. He would realize what truly mattered. I decided to tell him on our 5th anniversary. I wanted it to be perfect, a grand gesture to reset our lives. I took the day off work and spent hours transforming the house. I bought 3 dozen red roses and filled the living room with the scent of fresh flowers and vanilla candles. I cooked a rack of lamb with the herb crust he loved, opened a bottle of the same vintage wine we drank the night he proposed, and set the table for 2. In the center, I placed a small, velvet gift box. Inside wasn't a watch or cufflinks, but the positive pregnancy test and the first ultrasound picture. I imagined the scene so clearly in my mind. He would come home, see the effort, and his walls would crumble. He would open the box, see our baby, and fall to his knees, apologizing, hugging me, promising to never stray again. I clung to that fantasy like a lifeline. I was dressed in my best silk dress, waiting at the table by 7 o'clock. But 7 came and went. Then 8. Then 9. The candles burned down to nubs, the wax dripping onto the tablecloth. The lamb grew cold and congealed. My calls went straight to voicemail. By 10 o'clock, the silence in the house was deafening. I was shivering, not from the cold, but from a creeping dread. Finally, just before 11, headlights swept across the front window. I heard the car door slam. My heart leaped. I ran to the door, a smile plastered on my face, ready to forgive him for being late. But when the door opened, my world shattered. Daniel didn't walk in alone. He walked in with Elena, and trailing behind them was Sophia, wearing a smug, triumphant smile. They hadn't come to celebrate our anniversary. They had come to end me. I stood there, surrounded by the dying candles and the cold dinner, looking at the 3 of them like they were executioners. The romantic atmosphere I had created now felt pathetic, a cruel joke. Elena spoke first, her voice cutting through the room like a serrated knife. She told me to stop embarrassing myself. She told me Daniel had made his choice. And then she delivered the final blow. She pointed to Sophia and announced that she was carrying the Parker family heir. Sophia pushed her stomach out, gloating. That word hung in the air. Heir. For years, Elena had called me a barren tree, and now the mistress had given them what I supposedly couldn't. I looked at Daniel, begging him with my eyes to say something, to defend me, to show even an ounce of regret. But he just looked at the floor. He couldn't even meet my gaze. In that moment, looking at his cowardly slump, I realized the man I loved was dead. He had chosen the easy path, the money, the influence. He was willing to throw me away like yesterday's trash. You know the rest. The check for $175,000 thrown in my face. The divorce papers. The demand to leave my own home. Standing there, listening to their insults, something inside me shifted. The pain turned into ice. I rested my hand on my flat stomach, feeling a sudden, fierce protectiveness. I whispered a silent apology to my unborn baby for having such a father, and then I made a promise. I promised that I would be enough. I promised that I would give this child the world, and I would do it alone. I couldn't tell them I was pregnant. If I did, they would think I was using the baby as a pawn, or worse, they would try to take my child away from me. Elena would never let a Parker grandchild be raised by someone she despised. I had to protect my baby from their toxicity. So, I tore up the check. I signed the papers. I walked past them without shedding another tear, grabbing only my purse. I walked out into the cold Chicago night and felt the wind on my face. It felt like freedom. I hailed a taxi, but I didn't go to a friend's couch. I didn't go to a cheap motel to cry into a pillow. I gave the driver an address that would have made Daniel's jaw drop. the Lakeshore Grand. It is the most exclusive residential tower in the city, a place where professional athletes and CEOs live. When I walked into the marble lobby, the concierge nodded and held the elevator for me. I pressed the button for the penthouse floor. I swiped my black key card, and the doors opened directly into my sanctuary. A 5,500 square foot duplex with floor-to-ceiling glass walls overlooking the entire glittering skyline of the city. This was my apartment. I had bought it years ago with my own money, but I had never lived in it. I had kept it empty because I wanted to build a life with Daniel from the ground up. I wanted our success to be something we earned together. You see, I have a secret that not even Daniel knew. I wasn't just a lowly financial analyst making a modest salary. That was a cover. A costume I wore to feel normal. In reality, I am a whale in the stock market. A ghost investor. Since college, I have had an innate talent for reading the markets, predicting trends, and turning thousands into millions. My net worth is likely double what Sophia's father's pharmaceutical company is worth on its best day. I hid it because I was terrified that men would only want me for my money. I wanted to be loved for Juliana, not for my portfolio. I thought Daniel was the one. I played the role of the supportive, struggling wife because I thought we were building a foundation of love. I was wrong. I was Cinderella who willingly swept the floors, hiding her crown in the closet. But tonight, standing in the middle of my dark, luxurious penthouse, looking out at the city lights, the maid was gone. I wasn't crying anymore. Cinderella had returned to her palace, and this time, she was done being naive. I was ready to be the queen. And the first thing the queen had to do was simple. I picked up my phone. It was time to go to work. I picked up my secure line and dialed the number of Anthony Morris, my most trusted associate and the man who had managed my portfolio for years. When he answered, his voice was professional and sharp. "Hello, Anthony," I said, and my voice sounded colder than I had ever heard it before, steady and determined. "It is time to activate Plan B. I want every single investment and every stream of indirect financial support we have provided to the university teaching hospital over the last 3 years withdrawn. Specifically, anything attached to Dr. Daniel Parker must be severed immediately and completely." I did not wait for a confirmation because I knew Anthony would execute the order within the hour. Next, I called an elite concierge service in the city. I told them I required a full support team assembled within 48 hours. I needed the top obstetrician in the state, a personal nutritionist specializing in prenatal health, a private yoga instructor, and a discreet housekeeper. I made it clear that money was irrelevant. I only wanted the best of the best because I was building a fortress around myself. Finally, I stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror in my master bedroom and looked at the woman staring back at me. The naive, simple girl who had begged for her husband's love was gone. Juliana Richardson had returned. I placed a hand gently over my stomach where my secret was growing. "Little one," I whispered to the reflection, "from now on it is just you and me. We are starting a new life, a life where no one can look down on us and no one can ever hurt us again. Mama is going to give you the world." From that day forward, a new Juliana was born. I refused to wallow in depression or let the heartbreak consume me. Instead, I threw myself into the most scientifically rigorous pregnancy care program money could buy. I read books on child development, listened to classical symphonies, and transformed my penthouse into a sanctuary of peace. I cut every tie with my past life. I changed my phone number, deleted my social media, and ghosted the mutual friends who had stood by and watched Daniel humiliate me. To them, Juliana had simply vanished into thin air. I thought I would live my life in peace and raise my child alone, but fate seemed to have a different script written for me. It was arranging a reunion that none of us could have predicted, a meeting where the roles would be completely reversed. The phoenix had risen from the ashes, and she was ready to burn. While I began my new life of solitude and prosperity, completely hidden from their view, the people who had driven me out were celebrating what they thought was their happily ever after. Barely a month after I signed the divorce papers, the city was abuzz with news of the most extravagant wedding of the decade. The groom was none other than Daniel Parker, my ex-husband, and the bride was naturally Sophia Stewart, the golden daughter carrying the supposed heir to the Stewart Empire. Their wedding was a spectacle reported by every tabloid and society blog from New York to Los Angeles. I saw the photos online from the safety of my living room. People marveled at the multi-million-dollar ceremony, the custom designer gown, and the convoy of luxury cars that stretched for miles down the boulevard. The media painted a modern fairy tale raving about the fateful romance between a talented young doctor and a high-society heiress. There was no room in that narrative for a discarded ex-wife like me. I looked at Daniel's radiant smile and Sophia's smug, triumphant face. I saw my former mother-in-law Elena preening for the cameras. Surprisingly, my heart did not ache. I felt no jealousy, only a deep sense of ridicule. I wondered how they could believe that happiness built on lies and betrayal could ever survive. As I had predicted, Daniel's life after the wedding was not the paradise he had imagined. On paper he had everything he wanted. His powerful father-in-law Robert Stewart kept his promise. He invested a massive sum to open the Parker Private Clinic, a state-of-the-art facility located in the most prestigious medical district in the city. It was equipped with the latest technology and marketed aggressively across every media platform. Daniel went from being a salaried staff doctor to a clinic director and a successful entrepreneur overnight. He had ascended to the heavens, or so it seemed. His mother Elena was living her dream. She moved into the guest wing of the mansion Robert had gifted the couple. She had maids to pick up after her, a chauffeur to drive her around, and an unlimited budget for shopping. She spent her days boasting to her friends at the country club about her talented son and her wealthy daughter-in-law. She had reached the peak of her arrogance. However, behind the glossy photos and press releases, the truth was ugly. Although Daniel held the title of director, he was nothing more than a puppet. In the eyes of the Stewart family, he was an opportunist, a man from a humble background who had married up. Robert Stewart was an authoritarian patriarch who controlled every aspect of his empire with an iron fist. He openly despised Daniel. Every decision at the clinic, from hiring janitorial staff to managing the finances, had to be approved by Robert's office. Daniel was a director in name, only a glorified manager working under his father-in-law's thumb. At their suffocating family dinners, Daniel was constantly lectured and reprimanded by Robert and Sophia's brothers. They would remind him often that he needed to know his place and that without the Stewart name he would just be another pathetic doctor in a cheap suit. Those words were like thorns pricking at Daniel's inflated ego, but he could say nothing. His home life offered no sanctuary either. Sophia, having secured the ring, quickly dropped the act of the sweet doting girlfriend. She revealed her true nature as a capricious and spoiled heiress. She had zero interest in Daniel's work or running a household. She spent her days shopping with friends and complaining. She used her pregnancy as a weapon to torment him, forcing him to wait on her hand and foot to satisfy her bizarre whims. If he hesitated, she would dissolve into tears and threaten to call her father. Every time Daniel had to bow his head and apologize. He was living in a vice, losing his voice and his freedom bit by bit. Late at night, when Sophia was finally asleep, Daniel would step out onto the balcony and smoke in the dark. In the cold silence, he would remember the early days with me. We were poor then, but we were unbelievably happy. He remembered the modest dinners I cooked, the warmth of our small apartment, and my silent, unwavering support. He realized too late that he had thrown away a diamond to pick up a stone. But he had chosen this path and there was no turning back. He could only grit his teeth and continue his performance. He did not know that this was only the beginning of his downfall. A hidden storm of clever and cruel revenge was brewing just beyond his line of sight. While their family wallowed in their false victory, I was sitting in my penthouse at the Lakeshore Grand, quietly beginning my own game. I did not believe in revenge through scandals or screaming matches. Those methods were primitive and beneath me. I chose to destroy their empire with the very weapons they had used to seduce my husband: money and power. As a ghost investor, a shark in the financial waters, I had the means to dismantle them piece by piece. My plan was developed with surgical precision by Anthony Morris and my financial team. My target was not just Daniel's small clinic but the source of their power, Robert Stewart's pharmaceutical empire, Northstar Pharmaceuticals. I knew that if I cut off the head the body would die. My first strike was invisible. I ordered a complete analysis of the supply chain for Northstar Pharmaceuticals and the Parker Private Clinic. We discovered a critical weakness. They were heavily dependent on foreign suppliers for their advanced medical equipment and specialized pharmaceutical compounds. They relied on a few exclusive contracts with European manufacturers. That was their Achilles heel. I instructed my investment fund to launch a quiet acquisition campaign using a web of shell companies to obscure my identity. It was an expensive war, but I had billions at my disposal. In just 2 months I secretly became the controlling shareholder of 3 leading European medical device companies and 2 major Swiss pharmaceutical labs, the very ones Northstar relied upon. With the trump cards in my hand I began to tighten the noose. As the new major shareholder I issued directives to overhaul the distribution strategies. I required these companies to temporarily suspend all deliveries of next-generation equipment and drugs to the American market, citing a need to restructure and find new exclusive distributors. Naturally, the new distributor would be a company I owned. The supply crisis began almost immediately. Daniel's clinic suffered first and hardest. They had just opened and their marketing campaign promised the most advanced technology in the world. But now their orders were being rejected or indefinitely delayed. The CT scanners and 4D ultrasound machines they had promised patients remained on backorder. Specialized cancer medications and the latest cardiac drugs suddenly vanished from their inventory. The fallout was catastrophic. Patients who had paid thousands for premium health packages were furious when the clinic could not deliver. Reviews plummeted and lawsuits began to pile up. Daniel ran around like a man possessed trying to find alternative suppliers, but it was useless. All the major players were unknowingly under my control. He had no idea that the invisible enemy choking the life out of his business was the ex-wife he had discarded. Robert's pharmaceutical giant was in no better shape. They lost lucrative distribution contracts and their stock price went into freefall. Robert, the man who had always prided himself on his untouchable power, was now panicking. He took his frustration out on Daniel, screaming that his son-in-law was a curse who had brought bad luck to the family. Daniel's life became a living hell. He suffered from insomnia and lost weight, his face gaunt and haunted. He was paying the price for his betrayal, but he didn't know the storm had only just begun. While I was dismantling their world from the shadows, my own world was filled with peace and light. I entrusted the execution of my revenge to my team so I could dedicate my heart to a more sacred mission: motherhood. The 9 months of pregnancy are often described as difficult, but for me it was a gift. It was a journey of self-love I had never experienced before. I was no longer the girl who lived to serve others. I learned to slow down, to listen to my body, and to cherish the life growing inside me. I woke up to Mozart and Bach preparing nutritious breakfasts in my sunlit kitchen. I read classic literature aloud, hoping my child would hear the rhythm of beautiful words even in the womb. My nursery was a masterpiece designed by my own hand. I chose soft, calming colors and filled the room with the safest, most exquisite furniture money could buy. I hired a private instructor for prenatal yoga, and she came to the penthouse every morning to help me keep my body strong and supple. I attended private birthing classes and learned about infant care, not with anxiety but with joy. I did not feel lonely. The baby was my constant companion. Every time I felt a flutter or a kick, my heart swelled with a love so fierce it brought tears to my eyes. I talked to my baby constantly, promising that no matter how cruel the world outside was, they would always be safe in my arms. Of course, there were moments in the quiet of the night when the ghosts of the past would try to surface. I would see a couple walking in the park holding hands, the man gently touching the woman's belly, and my heart would clench. I wondered why my child could not have that complete picture. But I quickly banished those thoughts. I told myself that a toxic father, a man who abandons his family, is worse than no father at all. My child did not need Daniel. We were enough. His betrayal had not broken me, it had forged me into steel. Finally the day I had been waiting for arrived. I carefully selected the location for the birth. I chose the Providence Medical Center, one of the most exclusive and expensive hospitals in the country, known for its privacy and luxury. I booked the VIP birthing suite, a multi-room apartment within the hospital complete with a private medical team and 24-hour concierge. I spared no expense because I wanted the moment of my child's arrival to be perfect. But I could never have known that this seemingly perfect decision would be the twist of fate that would bring my two worlds crashing together. While I was checking into my suite prepared for the happiest day of my life, the storm I had sown was reaching its peak across town. The Parker Private Clinic was collapsing. The supply crisis had turned into a tsunami. Daniel had flown to Europe in a desperate attempt to negotiate with the suppliers, only to be met with cold rejections and closed doors. He had no clue that the person signing the rejection letters was sitting in a hospital room in his own city. He returned to the U.S. defeated and humiliated. His clinic, once the shining jewel of his ambition, was now an empty shell filled with idle machinery and angry patients. Robert Stewart was threatening to fire him and Sophia was threatening to leave him. He was drowning and he had nowhere left to turn. The collapse of Daniel's world wasn't a landslide, it was an avalanche, and I watched every moment of it from the safety of the shadows. Patients who had shelled out thousands of dollars for premium international medical services began to realize they were paying for a hollow shell. They felt cheated, and in America, when people with money feel cheated, they don't just complain, they litigate. The clinic lobby, which was once a sanctuary of hushed tones and marble floors, turned into a chaotic scene reminiscent of the stock market floor on a crash day. Angry patients waved bills demanding refunds, shouting fraud and threatening to go to the press. Banners went up outside and the local news vans started circling like sharks smelling blood in the water. The clinic's reputation, carefully cultivated over years, sank faster than a stone in the ocean. The talented specialists Daniel had poached from top hospitals with promises of massive bonuses began to jump ship. They saw the writing on the wall and handed in their resignations one by one, refusing to let their medical licenses be tarnished by Daniel's failing enterprise. Daniel ran around that clinic like a man trying to put out a forest fire with a garden hose. He was frantically trying to calm furious patients, retain key staff, and find new suppliers for the critical equipment I had blocked him from accessing, but every door he knocked on was locked tight. My reach was long and my grip was suffocating. His professional failure quickly bled into his personal hell. Robert Stewart, his powerful father-in-law who had poured a fortune into the clinic to buy his daughter happiness, was now watching his investment evaporate. The old man didn't just get angry, he got vicious. During family dinners at the Stewart estate, Robert would unleash his fury while Daniel sat there staring at his plate. "You are a failure, Daniel," he would roar, slamming his hand on the mahogany table. "I handed you a gold mine and you turned it into a sinkhole. You are nothing but a parasite feeding off my family's name." And Sophia, his princess bride, was no longer the gentle, adoring mistress she had been. When she saw her husband's status crumbling, she turned as cold as ice. The luxury cars and endless shopping sprees were threatened, and that was the only language she spoke. She would look at him with pure disgust, asking how he could show his face in their social circles. "I have lost credibility with my friends because of you," she would hiss. "If you don't fix this, don't expect me to stick around for the poverty tour." The very people who had elevated Daniel to the heavens were now uniting to push him into the abyss of humiliation. He was realizing the bitter truth that I had learned long ago. They never loved him. To the Stewarts he was just a tool, a piece to be moved for their convenience. As long as he was useful, they spoiled him, but the moment he faltered, they were ready to discard him like yesterday's trash. Then came the final blow. Northstar Pharmaceuticals began to buckle under the market pressure orchestrated by my investment fund. Stock prices plummeted, and to save his own empire, Robert Stewart made the ruthless corporate decision to cut the dead weight. He forced the bankruptcy of Daniel's clinic. In a span of a few months, Daniel went from being the golden boy of the medical world to a bankrupt pariah. He was unceremoniously thrown out of the building he used to run. The bank foreclosed on the mansion, and Sophia, true to her threats, left him after a screaming match that the neighbors probably heard 3 blocks away. She told him the baby she was carrying was no longer an heir to a dynasty but a liability she didn't want. Daniel had truly fallen from heaven to hell. He was forced to move back into a cramped apartment with his mother Elena dealing with the suffocating reality of his choices. He had chased fame and money and held it for a fleeting second only to lose what actually mattered. He had lost sincere love. He had lost a wife who would have walked through fire for him, and he had lost a child he didn't even know existed. In the dark quiet of that small apartment my image began to haunt him. He found himself wondering where I was and how I was living, never guessing that the ex-wife he suddenly missed was the architect of his destruction. Life, however, has a sense of irony that no scriptwriter in Hollywood could invent. We think we are the players in the game, but often we are just pieces being moved by fate. I thought our lines had permanently diverged, that I would live in peace with my baby while he paid for his sins and misery. But fate decided we owed each other one last encounter, a confrontation where life and death hung in the balance. It happened on a Tuesday evening just as the clock struck 6. I was on my yoga mat in my penthouse trying to find some zen with classical music when the first contraction ripped through me. It wasn't a practice pain, it was the real deal. My son had decided to make his grand entrance early. Anthony, my assistant, was a rock. He didn't flinch. He immediately called the hotline for Providence Medical Center where I had booked the diamond birth package. Everything was supposed to be perfect. I had the presidential suite reserved and Dr. William Nelson, one of the best obstetricians on the East Coast, was scheduled to deliver my baby. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and city lights streaking past the windows. I lay on the stretcher biting my lip to keep from screaming, clutching my belly and whispering promises to my unborn son. "We are going to be okay, little one, Mama is here." I was trying to stay calm, trusting in the exorbitant amount of money I had paid for premium care. But as they say, man plans and God laughs. When we arrived, I was informed that Dr. Nelson had been in a severe car accident on the freeway and wouldn't be making it. Panic started to set in. The clinic director met me personally, trying to smooth things over. He assured me they had an emergency plan. "We have brought in our newest surgeon," he told me, his voice dripping with forced reassurance. "He just joined us from a top hospital in Boston. He is brilliant and has handled cases far more complex than this. You are in the best hands, Ms. Richardson. We are paging Dr. Parker immediately." Dr. Parker. The name was common enough that it didn't register as a threat, just a generic label for the man who would save us. In the throes of labor pain, I didn't have the mental capacity to connect the dots. I just nodded, letting them wheel me into the VIP delivery room. It was more like a 5-star hotel room than a hospital, but I barely noticed the marble countertops or the view of the city skyline. Nurses swarmed around me, hooking up monitors and checking vitals. I heard them whispering about how lucky it was that Dr. Parker was on call and how many difficult surgeries he had already aced since being hired. The door swung open and a man in blue scrubs walked in. He was wearing a surgical cap and a mask that covered most of his face, leaving only his eyes visible. He moved with a brisk authority that commanded the room. He didn't say a word to me initially, just snapped his fingers for the patient chart. He scanned it quickly. Patient Juliana Richardson, 30 years old, 39 weeks, breech presentation, water broken. He read the details aloud in a deep, familiar voice that sent a shiver down my spine, colder than the air conditioning. It was a voice I could never forget, even if I lived 1,000 years. My body froze, the pain of the contraction momentarily eclipsed by sheer shock. Trembling, I lifted my head from the pillow and looked into the doctor's eyes. They were deep brown with a hint of sadness, but currently sharp with focus. They were the eyes I had woken up to for 5 years. "Daniel." I whispered the name, my voice barely audible over the beeping of the heart monitor. The doctor flinched as if he had been physically struck. His head jerked up from the file and he looked straight at me. For a moment the universe seemed to stop expanding. The professional distance in his eyes shattered, replaced by a look of absolute bewilderment. The clipboard slipped from his gloved hands and clattered onto the tiled floor, papers scattering everywhere. "Juliana," he gasped. His voice cracked, stripped of all its medical authority. "How can this be you?" The irony was suffocating. The only person capable of saving me and my child in this critical moment was Daniel, my ex-husband, the man who had betrayed me and whom I had systematically destroyed. After losing his own clinic and being blacklisted by the Stewart family connections, he had evidently salvaged his career by taking a staff job here. He was trying to rebuild from the ashes, unaware that the arsonist was lying on the gurney in front of him. Silence swallowed the room. The nurses looked back and forth between us, confused by the sudden breach of protocol. Daniel stood there paralyzed, staring at my swollen belly. His mask concealed his mouth, but his eyes screamed 1,000 questions. "Pregnant," he stammered, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You are pregnant. How long? Whose child is this? Did you remarry?" I could see the wheels turning in his head. He assumed I had moved on, found a better man, created a new life. I saw jealousy flash in his eyes, mixed with a profound sense of loss. He had discarded me, but seeing me carrying another man's child, as he assumed, was breaking him. A violent contraction seized me, and I let out a guttural scream that snapped him back to the present. My hands clawed at the bedsheets. "Doctor, please," I gasped, tears streaming down my face. "Save my son." The plea hung in the air, charged with our complicated history. My scream acted like a bucket of ice water. Daniel, the man, vanished and Dr. Parker returned. His training kicked in, overriding his emotional collapse. He pulled on a fresh pair of gloves and barked orders at the staff, his voice steady and commanding. "Get into position, everyone. Fetal heart rate is dropping, maternal pressure is spiking. This is a high-risk delivery. Prepare the instruments now." He leaned over me, pulling his mask down for a second to reveal a face that was more haggard and lined than I remembered. "Juliana, listen to me," he said, his voice stern but anchoring. "You need to focus. Forget who I am. Forget everything else. Think about the baby. I am going to get him out safely. Do you trust me?" I looked into his eyes and saw the determination of a man seeking redemption. I nodded. I had no choice. The labor was brutal. Because of the breech position and the stress, every minute felt like an hour. There were moments when the pain was so blinding I thought I would pass out, but Daniel's voice kept pulling me back. "Stay with me, Juliana," he would urge. "One more push. Do it for him." He was coaching me through the birth of a child he thought belonged to another man, pouring every ounce of his skill into saving us. Finally, with one last earth-shattering effort, a cry pierced the air. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. A healthy baby boy weighing 7 pounds 2 ounces. The nurse announced the time of death for my old life and the birth of my new one. "Congratulations," she cheered. I collapsed back onto the pillow, sobbing with relief. But the room was quiet. I looked up to see Daniel standing motionless, holding the baby wrapped in a white towel. He was staring at the infant's face with an expression of total shock. He looked from the baby to me and back to the baby. The resemblance was undeniable. The shape of the eyes, the nose, the curve of the ears. It was like looking at a miniature version of Daniel. No DNA test was needed. Biology had just screamed the truth across the delivery room. "This boy," he whispered, his voice trembling so hard the words barely came out. "He looks just like me." He looked at me, his eyes filling with a desperate hope and a crushing realization. "Juliana, tell me the truth. Is this child mine?" I didn't answer him with words. I just gave him a tired, sad smile. That silence was louder than any confession. Daniel broke. He wasn't a doctor anymore. He was a father, realizing he had missed everything. He had abandoned his wife while she carried his heir, and now he had delivered his own son into a world he had almost destroyed. He sank to his knees beside my bed, still cradling the baby as if he were made of glass. His shoulders shook uncontrollably as he began to weep. It was the ugly, raw crying of a man whose soul is being torn apart. "Forgive me," he sobbed into the sterile sheets. "Forgive me, Juliana. Forgive your father, son." The medical team stood around us in awkward silence, unsure of where to look. They were witnessing a tragedy and a miracle all at once. But as Daniel cried over the son he had unwittingly abandoned, he had no idea that outside the hospital walls another storm was brewing. A storm of jealousy and vengeance was gathering, ready to crash down on this fragile moment. I was moved to the VIP recovery suite, a space that looked more like a penthouse than a hospital room, but as I lay there holding my son I knew this was just the eye of the hurricane. The VIP recovery suite at Providence Medical Center was a sanctuary of silence and soft light. Everything about the room whispered luxury, from the high thread count sheets to the expansive window that framed the manicured hospital gardens below and the bright, hopeful blue of the American sky above. My son, a tiny miracle with flushed pink skin, lay peacefully in a bassinet right beside my bed. He shifted slightly in his sleep, his little fists clenching and unclenching as if he were dreaming of catching stars. My body felt heavy, aching and utterly exhausted from the labor, but my spirit felt lighter than air. I had done it. Against every odd, through every betrayal and lonely night, I had brought this child safely into the world. All the pain of the last few months, the humiliations and the schemes, seemed to dissolve like mist the moment I looked at his sleeping face. But I wasn't alone. Daniel Parker had not left the room after fulfilling his duty as my doctor. He stood in the far corner, still wearing his scrubs, lingering like a ghost haunting the scene of his own crime. His eyes were fixed on us, on the baby he hadn't known existed until this morning. There was a desperate hunger in his gaze, a mix of profound remorse and a terrifying desire to come closer, to reach out and touch the son he had fathered. Yet he remained rooted to the spot, paralyzed by the knowledge that he had lost the right to be here. Every time I glanced his way, he bowed his head, unable to meet my eyes, crushed by the weight of his own guilt. He tried to stammer out apologies, fragmented sentences that died in the air, but I didn't answer him. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was that words felt useless. The silence between us was heavy with things that could never be unsaid. However, that fragile peace was merely the eye of the hurricane. The storm I had anticipated finally broke, and it was more violent and absurd than even I could have predicted. In a hospital, secrets travel faster than germs. The rumor that Dr. Daniel Parker, the husband of the wealthy heiress Sophia Stewart, had delivered a baby for a VIP patient who turned out to be his ex-wife had spread through the corridors like wildfire. Perhaps a nurse had whispered it in the break room, or maybe fate just has a cruel sense of humor. Regardless of how it happened, the news reached Elena and Sophia, and to them, this wasn't a coincidence. It was a declaration of war. The door to my suite didn't just open. It was thrown wide with a violence that shook the walls, bypassing any knock or request for permission. Elena and Sophia stormed in like two furies, their faces twisted with a rage that bordered on madness. Elena was crimson with fury, her usually immaculate designer suit looking disheveled, while Sophia, heavily pregnant and teetering dangerously on heels she had no business wearing, looked ready to kill. Her makeup was smeared, and her eyes blazed with a hatred that wanted to consume me whole. "You! How dare you show your face here again?" Elena screamed, her voice shrill and echoing down the hallway outside, likely causing every doctor and patient on the floor to freeze. "My son already threw you out of our lives. How dare you cling to him like a parasite? What dirty tricks did you use to get him to deliver your baby? Do you think because you scraped together enough money for this room that you are somebody? You are nothing but a shameless fox." Sophia waddled aggressively toward the bed, ignoring Daniel in the corner. She looked at me with pure venom and then cast a disgusted glance at my sleeping son. "You actually had a boy. Congratulations." She spat the words out like poison. "I wonder whose bastard that actually is. You get kicked out of our house and manage to pop out a kid by another man in record time. You work fast. Or did you set this up? Are you trying to use this illegitimate brat to destroy my family? To try and steal Daniel back?" She was insulting me, which I could handle, but then she insulted my innocent child. A baby who knew nothing of the sins of his father or the cruelty of the world. The blood began to boil in my veins, hot and fierce. I could endure their attacks on my character, but I would not let them speak a single ill word against my son. I gritted my teeth and forced my aching body to sit up, the post-birth pain flaring sharp and hot, but it was nothing compared to the fire in my heart. Get out. Immediately. I said, my voice shaking with suppressed rage. This is a hospital, not a marketplace for you to scream like banshees. Scanned. ALS. Today I will teach you a lesson you will never forget. Elena yelled, shoving away a nurse who had rushed in to try and de-escalate the situation. You think you can hide in a VIP room? Don't dream of getting Daniel back from my daughter-in-law. She is carrying my grandson, the true heir. You and your illegitimate bastard have zero chance. Mom. Sophia. What are you doing? Daniel, who had been frozen in shock, finally seemed to wake up. He rushed forward, placing himself between the women and my bed, spreading his arms wide like a shield. This is a hospital. Lower your voices immediately. You need to leave. Now. You dare defend her. Elena spun on her heel, grabbing the front of Daniel's scrubs, her sharp manicured nails digging into his chest. Do you know the whole city is laughing at us because of her? They are saying you are sleeping with your ex-wife. You are my son. Act like it. Enough. Daniel shouted, a sound of pure desperation that I had never heard from him before. For the first time in his life, he was raising his voice against the mother who had controlled him for decades. I have suffered enough. I made mistakes. I lost everything because of you too. I do not want to make any more. Mom, Sophia, get out. I am not going anywhere until I teach this creature a lesson in decency. Sophia shrieked. Jealousy had robbed her of her sanity completely. She shoved Daniel aside with surprising strength and lunged toward the bassinet where my son lay. The baby, startled by the noise, began to cry. She was reaching for him, her intentions unclear but terrifying. Don't you dare. Daniel and I screamed in unison. I ignored the tearing pain in my abdomen and tried to throw my legs over the side of the bed to protect my child. But just as Sophia's hand was inches from the bassinet, a voice cold as steel cut through the hysteria. Stop. Immediately. The room went deathly silent. Everyone froze and turned toward the door. Standing there was a man in an immaculate black suit, holding a leather briefcase. His expression was grave and authoritative. It was Anthony Morris, my personal attorney and right-hand man. He hadn't come alone. Flanking him were 2 uniformed officers from the city police department and 2 private security guards who looked like they could move mountains. The sudden appearance of legal counsel and law enforcement sucked the oxygen out of the room. Elena and Sophia shrank back, their bravado evaporating instantly. You. Who are you? Why are you here? Elena stammered, fear replacing her arrogance. Anthony didn't even acknowledge her question. He walked straight past her to Sophia, who stood frozen by the bassinet. He pulled a thick file and a tablet from his briefcase. You are Sophia Stewart. Correct. Anthony asked, his voice devoid of warmth. I am the attorney representing a major investor in Northstar Pharmaceuticals. We have compiled irrefutable evidence that your father, Robert Stewart, and his company have been engaged in massive fraudulent activities. This includes the manufacturing and distribution of counterfeit medications and tax evasion totaling hundreds of millions of dollars. What? Sophia's jaw dropped, her face draining of all color. You are lying. My father runs an honest business. You are slandering him. Slander requires the statement to be false. Anthony said with a sneer. He tapped the screen of his tablet and turned it around. It played a grainy but clear video of Robert Stewart accepting a briefcase full of cash from a government official. All evidence, including financial ledgers, video surveillance, and witness testimony, has already been handed over to the district attorney. As we speak, federal agents are executing search warrants at your father's offices and homes. He then turned his attention to the police officers. As for Sophia Stewart and Elena Parker, they have unlawfully entered a patient's room, disturbed the peace, and engaged in harassment. My client wishes to press charges to the fullest extent of the law. Sophia's world disintegrated in a matter of seconds. She staggered back and collapsed onto the floor, realizing that her father, the pharmaceutical empire, her money, and her pride were all gone. Elena stood trembling, her eyes darting around the room as the pieces finally clicked into place. The bankruptcy of Daniel's clinic, the sudden downfall of the Stewart family. None of it was bad luck. Behind it all was an invisible hand, a terrifying force that had orchestrated their ruin. And that force was the modest, quiet daughter-in-law they had thrown out like trash. The police stepped forward, reading Elena and Sophia their rights. Sophia began to scream hysterically, unable to process the reality of her destitution. Elena, however, went silent. Her eyes became glassy and vacant. She looked at me as the officer guided her toward the door, her expression a complex mix of hatred and terror. "Who are you?" "Really?" she whispered. I didn't answer. I just looked at her with a gaze that held both pity and ice. She would never truly know. As they were led away, the chaos receded, leaving only me, the baby, and Daniel in the room. Daniel stood there, pale and shaking. He had witnessed the entire dismantling of his life. He finally understood the magnitude of what I had done, and the power I held. He hadn't just lost a wife. He had lost a future he could never regain. He walked slowly toward the bed and sank to his knees. It was a familiar gesture, one he had made before when asking me to marry him, but now the context was tragic. "Juliana," he whispered, his eyes red and brimming with tears. "I understand everything now. I am not worthy of your forgiveness. I don't dare ask you to come back to me because I know I lost that right a long time ago. I only ask for one thing." He looked at the baby, the son he had met only hours ago. "Let me be this boy's father. Give me a chance to make amends for my mistakes through him. I won't ask for anything else. I will work like a dog for both of you. I just want to watch him grow up. I want to be allowed to call him my son. Please. I am begging you." He bowed his head to the floor, sobbing with the raw, ugly cry of a man who has nothing left to lose. I looked down at him, my heart a tangle of conflicting emotions. My child needed a father. But was this man, who had abandoned us so cruelly, worthy of the title? I looked at my sleeping son, then back at the broken man at my feet. "Stand up, Daniel," I said, my voice calm, stripped of resentment. "You don't have to work like a slave. You are the father of this child. That is a biological fact that cannot be changed. The blood in his veins is yours, and I cannot take that right away from you. I do not want my son to grow up wondering who his father was." A glimmer of hope sparked in Daniel's eyes. "Does that mean I can visit him? Take care of him? Be a dad?" "Wait," I interrupted, holding up a hand. My voice hardened into steel. "Only in your role as his father. As for the two of us, Daniel, everything is truly over. It ended the day you stood silent while your mother and your mistress humiliated me. Love without protection is like a house without a roof. It cannot shelter anyone from the storm." He froze, the hope in his eyes dimming into resignation. He understood. I could forgive for the sake of our son, but I would never forget. The wounds he and his family had inflicted were too deep to ever fully heal. He had lost me forever. He would have to stand at a distance, watching our happiness, living the rest of his life in the shadow of his regret. That, perhaps, was the greatest punishment of all. My story, in many ways, ends here. In the weeks that followed, the Stewart family officially filed for bankruptcy. Sophia's father received a harsh prison sentence for his crimes. Sophia and Elena faced their own legal reckoning. Daniel lost his prestige, his career momentum, and his family. He paid a terrible price for his ambition and his weakness. As for me, I never went back to him. I chose the life of a single mother. I had money, I had status, and I had my victory. But I realized that the most valuable thing wasn't the revenge or the wealth. It was the small life in my arms. It was the freedom of my soul to let go of the painful past and move forward. I didn't need to seek cruel, ongoing revenge because my inner peace and my happiness with my child served as the sweetest, most bitter retaliation against those who had betrayed me. Looking back on this journey, on the path from the peak of fragile happiness through the abyss of betrayal and into the fire of rebirth, I know it leaves many conflicting emotions. You might feel outrage at the cruelty of people, satisfaction at the triumph of justice, or sadness for a love that went to waste. But beneath the drama, there is a lesson. When Daniel stood at his crossroads, choosing between 5 years of our love or the fame and career Sophia offered, he chose the shortcut. He thought he needed a woman who was a shiny decoration to elevate him. He was wrong. A true partner isn't a trophy to display. A partner is the solid ground beneath your feet, the person who can walk through the storm with you. I was that ground for him, but he was too blind to see it until the earth crumbled beneath him. Let this be a reminder. Marriage isn't a business transaction. You cannot weigh affection on a scale against material gain. Money and fame can be lost and found again a dozen times over. But a person who truly loves you, who sees you and supports you when you have nothing. Once you lose that person, you may never find them again. Daniel's loneliness is the price of that lesson. I had a secret. I was rich and talented, and I hid it to see if I was loved for who I was. I got my answer. Now, I have my son, and I have myself. And that is more than enough. Looking back on everything now as I sit here in the quiet nursery rocking my sleeping son, it feels like I lived 2 completely different lives. Some people might say I was foolish to play the role of a humble housewife when I was actually sitting on a fortune. They might say I tormented myself by pinching pennies and budgeting for groceries when I could have bought the whole supermarket without blinking an eye. But deep down I know that my desire was pure. I didn't want a marriage built on the foundation of my bank account. I wanted to be loved for who I was, not for what I could provide. That financial and intellectual independence I hid for so long turned out to be my most powerful weapon when the tragedy finally struck. When Daniel walked out on me for another woman, I didn't collapse. I didn't beg him to stay, and I didn't cling to his leg crying. Why would I? I knew I didn't need to rely on him or anyone else to survive. I had the skills, the character, and the resources to rebuild my life from the ground up. My rising from the ashes wasn't some miracle from heaven. It was the result of years of hard work, late nights studying, and the quiet empire I had built in the shadows. And if there is one message I want to pass on to all the women listening to me right now, it is this. Never place your entire happiness in a man's hands. Love is beautiful and it is important, but it is not everything. Always develop your mind. Always have your own money. Always keep a part of yourself that belongs only to you. Because when you can stand on your own 2 feet, you gain the ultimate power, which is the right to choose. Even when the storm comes crashing down, and even when the person you trusted most betrays you, you will not break. You will have the strength to overcome it all and find the light, just like I did. Perhaps the most human lesson I learned through this ordeal wasn't about business or revenge, but about maternal love and forgiveness. When I was first confronted with Daniel's betrayal and the cruelty of his mother Elena and his mistress Sophia, I wanted blood. I chose revenge. And let me tell you, it was a clever and satisfying revenge. Anthony Morris and I systematically dismantled their lives until they lost everything. But in that final moment when my enemies were metaphorically kneeling at my feet, I didn't destroy them completely. I paused. Why did I stop? Because of this little life breathing softly in my arms right now. My son softened my heart and gave me a reason to be generous. The sacred love of a mother conquered the hatred of a scorned wife. I realized that while revenge could bring me temporary satisfaction, it would keep me trapped in the past, drowning in negative emotions forever. I didn't want my beautiful innocent boy to grow up in a toxic atmosphere of hatred and spite. My forgiveness toward Daniel was not an agreement to get back together. Absolutely not. It was forgiveness at the highest level. I forgave him not for his sake but to free my own soul. I allowed him to visit and fulfill his fatherly duties, not because I still loved him as a husband but because I loved my son enough to give him a father. That was a choice of strength, not weakness. It teaches us that holding on to grudges is exhausting. It wears you down. Sometimes letting go is the strongest thing you can do. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting what happened, but it allows the past to rest so that we can look toward a better future with ease. My greatest happiness at the end of this long twisting road isn't the successful revenge or the wealth I reclaimed. It is the inner peace I feel right now holding my child and knowing that our future is bright and secure. My story might be complete for now, but I hope the message resonates with you forever. It is about sobriety and love, the value of independence, the power of generosity, and the character of a modern woman. I hope it gives you the belief that no matter how much life pushes you into difficult circumstances, as long as you don't lose hope, dignity, and self-respect, you will eventually find true happiness. Happiness created with your own two hands. Did you enjoy my journey? If you listened all the way to the end, please write the number 1 in the comments below so I know you are part of the family. If you liked this story, you can support me by hitting that like button on the video and maybe even sending a small donation if you feel moved to do so. You can find many similar life stories right here on my channel, so please make sure you subscribe and check out the others too. I have highlighted 2 new stories on the screen that everyone seems to love. Thank you so much for being here with me. Until the next story, take care of yourselves.
Thank you for listening to this story until the end. Hopefully every moment in the story has touched your heart, brought you some reflection, some emotion, and hope. Thank you for taking the time to experience it with us, and hope that each next story will always accompany you on your life journey.